Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cocktail Classified. It's Patrick Abalos again. This week, I'm excited to bring in one of my good homies, Matt LoFink from Frederick Wildman. He's talking about a little bit about his history from his time in New Orleans and a little bit about that special liquid called Chartreuse. So, welcome to the show, Matt LoFink.
Good to see you again, Patrick.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, of course. So, for the viewers that don't know who you are, who are you?
Matt LoFink, originally Philly-born, son of a bitch. Can I curse on here? I guess I can now.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
I was able to start off my bar career outside of Philly and moved down to New Orleans, where I managed a cocktail bar called Cure for a few years. And then I became an ambassador for Chartreuse, and I've been doing that for about almost 6 years now.
6 years.
Yeah.
How long have you been in the industry outside of the 6 years?
So about 16 years total.
Okay.
Yeah, so a long time.
Yeah.
Majority of my life.
The majority of your life has been in the industry. So
Yeah.
what is your favorite thing about bartending or this industry?
This industry, my favorite thing, it really is just a people business.
Yeah.
Whether your customers that you see every day, like they become your friends, and your coworkers are your new family. Every time I worked at a bar or even rep a bar or whatever, like those people are in my lives now. And they really become like a part of who I am, and I learn from them, and hopefully I can teach them something now that I'm a little bit older and more advanced in my career.
Yeah.
So I think it is like a family. When we talk about industry and use the word industry, it means family to me. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we'll circle back to this, but definitely the industry is very, very tight knit, especially in New Orleans where you're at, and here in Houston we have a very tight knit family. So we'll circle back to that. But the main question I have for you right now is, how did you get into the industry? Kind of tell us where you started. I know you said you started as a bouncer back in Philly. How did going from a bouncer to becoming now national brand ambassador for Chartreuse? Kind of, how'd you start? What led you to this path? If someone wants to go down this path, what recommendations would you have for them?
it was a long and blurry road, but it's essentially, I got into this business like a lot of other people did, kind of by accident. My uncle's best friend owned a bar in my town where I grew up, and I was a bigger guy, football player, and one night he needed a doorman and just was like, "Hey, Matt's big. He looks intimidating. I'll see if he wants $100 cash and he can work at the door." So 20 years old, I hop in, no idea what I'm doing. I never yelled at anybody my entire life.
Yeah.
I just tried to look tough and get through 8 hours without getting my ass kicked. And I'll never forget the first time I had to throw someone out of the bar. It's just such a weird rush and feeling to be like, "Hey, you have to get out of here." And
Yeah.
everybody that I worked with, like, I thought it was going to be a big deal, and it wasn't. They're just like, "Oh, we throw people out all the time."
Yeah.
So I thought that was unique. And then throughout the night, you meet all the people that come in, the regulars. You get to know the staff members, and I was just kind of hooked from day one. So I was like, "Hey, can I come back and do this again tomorrow?" And they're like, "Well, we were going to ask you, so sure."
Yeah.
So I did it for a weekend, and I got a phone call on Monday being like, "They'd love to have you back again. You free on Friday?" I'm like, "Cool."
Yeah.
So a couple of weekend shifts while I had a job, it was kind of moonlighting, and then it became full time. They really liked having me, and I liked working there. And it was at a point in my life where I was, 20 and then turning 21, and, didn't grow up in the nicest of places, didn't have the closest group around me. A lot of friends were off in college. I kind of felt alone, and that kind of bar like saved me a little bit, meeting that family. And I just became obsessed with the industry. And after becoming obsessed with the people, I became obsessed with the alcohol.
Okay.
And I don't mean that in the bad way. I mean that in the good way of I became a complete nerd.
Yeah.
Anytime we got a new whiskey in the bar, even though I was just a bouncer, I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to know its history. I wanted to know why we got it. I wanted to know what's price point. I wanted to know everything. So that ultimately, people were like, "You should just hop behind the bar." And I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm not pretty enough for that."
Pretty.
Yeah, I was like, "Oh, I don't think I'm pretty enough for that." And they're just like, "Well, everybody here loves you, and all the regulars love you. And, if anyone's sick one day, we'd love to throw you behind." And I got the call like, "Hey, can you bartend tonight?" I was like, fuck, I'll try.
Yeah.
And turns out I was natural.
Okay.
So started doing some shifts, and then I moved up to a more of a corporate bar.
Okay.
Bigger challenge, huge bar. We were doing $30,000 profit a night.
Okay.
It was very busy all the time, and it was definitely more corporate, which I wasn't used to, but it definitely was something that was important that I didn't realize at the time. I needed structure, and a bar that had no structure to a bar that had corporate structure taught me a lot very quickly on how I need to A, manage a bar, B, deal with guests in a more appropriate manner instead of just being like, hey, you're out. So that's kind of how everything got kicked off. And, 24 years old, I realized I just wanted to grow more, and the corporate bar wasn't the answer. So packed my bags and moved to New Orleans.
Okay.
Just like that.
Just like they just packed it up and moved
I
down
just
south.
I was actually offered a promotion to AGM at the restaurant, and I said I quit instead.
You said you quit and just packed everything up?
Yeah,
and
impulse. It's a true story. I kind of just was like, no, I need to quit. Like, I think I'm going to quit. They started like putting me through some training programs and stuff, but at the end of the day, I was just like, I'm not following my dreams here. I got to go somewhere and be in more of my element. So
you're looking for more of that, like a career growth, because you weren't kind of getting it at that corporate environment.
Yeah, I was obsessed with cocktails at the time, just like you were, just like we all were.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had a lot to offer in the cocktail world, and I thought New Orleans would be a good place to kind of learn. I was obsessed with like vintage cocktails, classic cocktails, pre-prohibition, and I just thought it would be a good city for me to like go down and get a good education. And I was able to work at some amazing bars and restaurants there and learn a lot from a lot of people and become the professional I am today. So.
Awesome. When you were just getting into this, what kind of resources did you look into to start getting nerdy with? Because I know this is more of a recent thing where brands are now putting more emphasis on education. But back then, like even when I started bartending around the same time you did, I imagine there wasn't much out there. You were literally just asking questions to reps.
Yeah, and honestly, that was a big one for me. I asked a lot of reps a lot of questions. There's so many reps out there that I still see today, and they remember me when I was a little baby bartender being like, what's that? What's this? Tell me about this. Yeah. Why does this taste like this? Yeah. And they're like, it's so funny to see you answering all the nerdy questions now. Like when I was, and that's really how we did it. We asked the reps, like, tell me more about your brands. They would take you out to lunch or a drink and walk you through it. But also I was lucky to have some really good mentors, even from day one back in Philly to New Orleans to now. Yeah. I've always had a good mentor. I believe in the mentorship programs that people offer, and I believe that you should just pick your own mentor. And I always was able to be like, hey, you're my mentor now. You're going to teach me everything now. So I got to give a lot of credit to Neil Bodenheimer. He was, the owner of Cure, is the owner of Cure. Yep. And he taught me a lot about business and being a business professional. And that was more valuable than the cocktails to me, is actually being a professional in this industry. Yeah. And, I loved making cocktails. I loved being the cocktail bartender. But really when I was like, this is what I do now, is when Neil's mentorship became important to me. Yeah. And as far as like cocktails and spirits, learning them, books, don't be afraid that, you find a new product on your shelf. Look it up in a book or Google it online, look at the flavor profile, see how it's made. I think knowledge is power in this industry. It's a tool to work with your guests and give them the best experience. Yeah. But also, like, everybody should be the best at what they do. Yeah. And you want to be the best, you got to know all the things. So, yeah.
That's very for sure. Knowledge is very, very important in this industry, and I think it's very interesting to see how brands now are putting emphasis on the brand knowledge side of it compared to a couple of years ago, which is great, which I think is great for our industry. It's going to move us forward. But I also think what I've noticed is there's a lot of bartenders that'll get the knowledge, but also be kind of not humble. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
And then I think
I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's always important for us to be humble, and I think sometimes that gets lost especially when we're in a very mentor-mentee kind of environment, like you speak to. Like, a lot of older bartenders now don't really want to share the information with the new upcoming generation that's coming in, is what I'm seeing. Yeah. But on the inverse of that, you also have those younger bartenders don't care as much. which I've been seeing a lot more here in Houston. Is like there's some that really do care about it, and there's some that really don't care about what we do or what it is to be a bartender.
Yeah, that's actually really funny. A good friend of mine named Graham, who we discussed earlier, and you actually met when we went to France
Mr.
together.
Graham, Mr. Essex.
Mr. Essex. He asked me a pretty good question the other day about, how he had this new young bartender in that didn't know what she was doing at all. And he's like, what do I do? And I'm like, teach her.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, 100%. I was going to do that, but I didn't think about it. And I'm like, let's actually all get into that process. Like, that's what we do. We get a new employee in and you're just like, oh, this person doesn't know anything. And it's just human impulse to say that. But you have to be the one that goes, oh yeah, I just need to teach them. I just need to put that on my shoulders and we'll learn to work together and we'll become harmonious behind the bar together. It just takes time, a little bit of effort. But, I always argued back in the day, nobody was going to give me experience. I had to get experience and I couldn't get hired without experience. So it's the same thing. It's, people need to take chances on people. And then when they're green, when they're new, when they don't understand something, we have to be the bigger people and go, okay, let me teach you how to do this.
Yes, for sure. And for everybody out there, remember, it's about mentorship. It's important that we teach the younger kids, not the young kids, but the younger generation, what we can bring to the table, what we've learned, our mistakes, and how we've kind of grown from that.
Sorry.
And I think that's a big thing that the industry needs to focus on, I think, in this next year.
Yeah.
Is retouching the standards and remembering that we are a mentor-mentee profession.
100%. I couldn't agree with that more. And, education is my biggest part of the job with Chartreuse. And I think it needs to go beyond what I talk about with just the brands. And we always have had a good philosophy on educating through our brands. The history is just as important as the cocktails, if not more so. But we also want to, we use the bartenders to teach the consumers. The reason we do our programming and how we do it is because we want to go, hey, bartender A at, bar A, we're going to teach you about Chartreuse. And then when you have someone that comes in and asks about it, you can recite everything I just told you. Because now you are the knowledgeable one. And now you have an extra tool to talk about something one of your guests likes. And that has been the biggest thing that I've seen. I mean, I've lived in a few cities with this job. And when I go to a bar, revisiting after I've done a masterclass, and I hear a customer ask about Chartreuse, and the bartender who was at my class is now walking them through it with pure joy in their eyes. I'm like, this is what the bar industry is about. Passion, excitement, and just a thirst for knowledge and love of what they do.
For sure. It's always important, like to me, when a brand rep would come in or even like a sales rep would come in, I can get the sales sheets myself. Give me more data outside of those sales sheets. Don't copy and paste everything to every single person you're telling. Like, learn something about the brand that you're representing, or some fact about the spirit, and then talk more about it.
So, agreed. And you don't have to be a quote unquote spirits nerd, or cocktail nerd. You just have to be knowledgeable enough to know what you're selling.
Right.
And if you work at a cocktail bar, you need to know cocktails. If you work at a dive bar, you need to know whiskey and tequila and what your customers are going to come in and drink. More or less what your regulars are going to drink. If you have a regular who drinks tequila soda every day, maybe find them a product that they're going to like, or see what product they like and get the bar manager to order that for them. We do forget that this industry is service. The customers pay our bills. When I was a bartender, I always preach that, like, you're being mean to somebody that's literally paying for you to, pay your rent, get your car bill. Like, why? Like, I don't understand that. Why would you be mean to someone who's literally giving you money for food? So that has gone a little south over the last decade or so. But I see it upcoming with the new regime. I do see a lot more customer service oriented bartenders out there. But like you've said, the lack of passion for the actual products seems to be diminishing a little bit.
That's true. And again, that's perception's reality.
Yeah.
There's a big thing I say all the time. It's like, if you perceive something a certain way, then you you have 30 seconds to make that influence on the person, and if you don't,
Yeah,
just have
first
something
impressions are the most
impressive.
important.
Yep.
You know, so
That's awesome.
yeah.
So kind of going back to kind of your career path, I know we said we kind of stopped at, you moved south to New Orleans. So where in New Orleans did you go? I know you went to Curco, right?
Yes.
That's where you started at.
Yeah, so I actually, my first few months in New Orleans, I worked at a little place that just reopened under new management. It was called the Bombay Club.
Okay.
I worked with a lovely guy named Blake, who is still a dear friend, and he was an OG New Orleans bartender. He's someone who, like, you see him, and he just looks like an old New Orleans bartender.
Okay.
You're just like, okay, this is the guy who's going to teach me like New Orleans cocktails, and he had an amazing knowledge, like really just a very smart, guy who I really trusted to learn from, and he taught me everything I needed to know about New Orleans cocktails. And our menu was sidecars and Sazeracs and Pim's cups and everything that is a New Orleans cocktail menu. So I was able to learn that very quickly and learn the specs, classic specs that he's learned over his time, and he had a great mentor. But I wanted more.
Okay.
I really liked the modern cocktail scene. I wanted to be able to create my own drinks and just have fun with it that way. So I met Neil. I was living across the street from Cure, so I would bump into him every time I was grabbing my cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we just started chatting, and we just became, kind of homies or neighbors, whatever you want to call it. And the real night was I actually physically ran into Kirk Estopanol, who is another one of my dear friends and mentors. I bumped into him at Cure when I was stopping for a drink. And I'm like, I am so sorry. Can I please get you another drink? And he's like, don't worry about it. It's all good. Like, I'm like, no. Where I'm from, you have to like at least buy somebody something if you knock a drop of alcohol out of their glass. I'm like, let me buy you a shot. And he's like, do you want to do a shot? I'm like, I'd love to do a shot with you, please. Walks behind the bar, grabs a bottle of rum and 2 glasses, pours them, and I'm like, okay, you're important here.
Okay.
I'm like, I come to this bar all the time. And he's like, I'm Kirk. I'm, one of the partners, and he told me his story. He used to work at the Violet Hour in Chicago,
Okay.
One of my favorite places, and we just hit it off. And next thing I know, I got a job offer to work at Belloc, which was Curco's hotel bar at the time. May it rest in peace.
Yeah. And they still have, so Cure still has Cure in New Orleans, right?
Yeah, we have well, they have Cure,
have,
Cane and Table, and Vowels as the 3 right now. So very popular places, great, delicious spots. Highly recommend people go check them out.
Okay, awesome. How long were you at Cure for?
I believe 6 years.
6 years, you said. Okay.
Yeah, or very close to. So.
And you progressed from a bartender to bar manager, right?
Yes.
Kind of
so the way it works, or the way it used to work with Cure, was like a lot of other like top cocktail places. You start as an apprentice.
Yep.
Most of the people that worked there actually would start usually as a busser, and then you get promoted to server, then you get promoted to barback, then you get promoted to apprentice. Working at Belloc as a bartender first it gave me the ability to skip into just apprenticeship.
Yeah.
So if you work at Cure, you have to work your way up from the bottom. But if you worked at one of their sister bars, you had the ability to like transfer over into apprenticeship if the management saw that you were worthy of. So it was a huge honor. Anytime you went from one of their places to Cure, Cure was the OG, the Mecca. So it was a big honor. And my friend Alex and I, she was for Cane and Table. I was at Cure. Okay. We both moved over at the same time. So we kind of became buddies, and like, we were doing the same things, had the same like similar shifts, and she was very helpful like to learn with and stuff. So, but yeah, I apprenticed for about 6 months, which was considered very fast. Normally people who didn't have a bartending background, it took them like a year. Okay. But I had bartending background, I had experience, and yeah, 6 months is pretty normal. So Alex and I both graduated to bartender at the same time. Okay. And basically kind of gives you a little bit more power, let's call it. Like you're trusted more. Yeah. You get to say more about the cocktail menu, have a bigger influence on the menu. And that was, honorable. Like you got so much more passionate when you are like, cool, like I am a part of this team now. I'm not trying to earn it anymore. Like, so when the next apprentice comes in, you're like, I know what I just went through, and I know how I can, make your job better. And so some people they use the new people as the whipping person, and you got to initiate them. And I'm not like that. I'm like, I know every part of apprenticing that I hated, and I'm going to make sure you don't have to go through that.
Yeah.
That's my style. Both styles work, but we had a lot of people that couldn't handle the apprenticeship.
Yeah.
It's hard. You don't make as much money. It's long hours. It's a tough program. Basically back in the day, if you didn't get a drink put on the menu, you were like on the rocks. Like your job was on the rocks. So, you needed to make a menu placement in order to keep your job.
Okay.
Not, I believe, how they do things anymore.
Yeah.
But back then, and I don't even know if that's true. I never saw someone lose their job over not getting a menu placement. But we also had very talented people that always got menu placements. Yeah. So it could have just been like the fear.
I get you. Okay.
So
that's awesome. What was the one big takeaway you took away from that group?
Curco, really just becoming a professional bartender.
Yeah.
Like in all shapes, ways, and form. Customer service mixed with great cocktails, mixed with passion, mixed with spirits, mixed with off-site events. Yeah. You got to see how, this all worked. And they were the first place that didn't have such a unique, an ununique structure, I guess. It was a unique structure because we were the bosses. Every bartender was considered a manager. Yeah. Of course, if, like Ryan Gannon was one of my older bartenders, he was there a little bit longer than I was. So if Ryan and I are working together, Ryan's going to make the decisions. Yeah. It's a respect thing. We're on the same level, but it's a respect thing. So it was cool because it gave you a sense of responsibility, and it kind of taught you how to run a bar and own a bar one day. Yeah. So the thing I've always appreciated about like the cocktail bars is they always are willing to teach their people how to do this. Yeah. So I've met a lot of bar owners that have taught new bar owners, a good example of, Alba
Wharton.
Yeah. She is so amazing and runs such a great bar program. And she came, from a bar by Bobby Hugel, and you see that everywhere, all over the country. And I think that's how it should be done. Yeah.
It was definitely Alba and Bobby here in Houston kind of established the craft cocktail movement. And then you saw all the barters kind of branch out from them and start opening new things. And now they're wherever they are now. But
they created branches, and I think that's the way it should be. Yeah. And I hope that, the people that I work with now, my ambassadors with Frederick Wildman and Chartreuse, I hope that I can teach them something. And I always tell them, like, I want to be working for you one day.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want you to surpass me. That's what a good mentor should be, someone who encourages someone to be better than what they are.
Yeah.
So
that's for sure. So at Kierco, is that where you kind of got your introduction to Chartreuse, or where did you fall in love with Chartreuse? At what point in this career path did you find yourself there?
Chartreuse is a long history with me. I know where the first time I had it. I remember the first time I fell in love with it, and I remember the first time it broke my heart. But for the first time I ever had it was, I think, a funny story. Where I was living outside of Philly, and we always went to Atlantic City. It was only 24-hour bar. Yeah. If you think about it in New Jersey. So 40-minute drive, and we always had free rooms and stuff because we were there so much. And one night I just lost way too much money, like all of my tips from the shift.
Okay.
And I was like, oh man, like I need a stiff drink. I'm like, because I'm going to stress out. I'm not going to sleep.
Yeah.
So went to the bar, and I can't even remember what bar this was, but I asked the bartender, I'm like, I need something to forget what I just did. Okay. And he's like, you ever try Chartreuse? And I was like, I don't think so. So I was 21, so he pours me a big,
just like a big
free pour, no pour spout, like
okay.
doop doop doop. And at first I was like, whoa.
Okay.
Like it just hit me in the chest, like. Yeah. But I've always liked that. Like I've always been like I like the burn. I like, when something takes me off guard. So I didn't like it the first taste, but I was fascinated. Okay. So I kept sipping it and understanding it more and getting used to the flavors. And by the end of it, I was like, that was amazing. Okay. But it kind of like dissipated for a little bit. Anytime I'd see it, I didn't see it often in South Jersey
Okay.
and even Philly. I didn't see it that often. But when I did, I knew what it was, and I would be like, "You guys gotta try this."
Yeah.
But I never bought a bottle for my house or anything, and it
Okay.
wasn't until New Orleans where I was drinking it every day.
Okay.
You know, it was an industry, and it still is an industry
Mm-hmm.
shot there. When we got done our shifts, we had a thing at the Bombay Club. Whoever broke the most glasses had to make last words for the whole staff.
Okay.
We had a little tiny bar where, you know, Blake was a big guy, I'm a big guy, and we had Meredith, who's petite, but she always broke the most glasses somehow.
Okay.
The glasses were over our heads in the bar, so if I even like raised my hand, I would
Just
knock a
is
glass
not gonna-
off.
Okay.
Old New Orleans bar. So yeah, we always did that. Whoever broke the most glasses had to make the last words at the end of the night.
Okay.
And then, you know, like any addict, I started mainlining it. You know, I'm like, I don't want a last word tonight. Just pour me
Just pour it straight.
Just pour it straight. Just give
Okay.
me a shot. You
Yeah.
know. So I went from that to, you know, shots every night after work into, you know, I wonder like what I can do with this in cocktails. You see it in a lot of cocktails, but like I want to do my own Chartreuse cocktail. I think that's what makes Chartreuse a little bit special is people go, I want to make my Chartreuse cocktail. You know, they're the last words out there, the swizzles. You know, my friend Marco Dionysus made that swizzle, you know, many years ago, and that's a perfect example of like what bartenders like to do with Chartreuse. They how do I make this mine?
Yeah. Like the Naked and Famous.
Naked and
Also another
Famous,
big one,
Joaquin, yeah. So I wanted to do that, and I started playing around with it and fell in love with it that way. So it kind of hit both my personal life and my professional life, and it kind of married them, you know? So anytime I walked into a bar in New Orleans, someone poured me a shot of Chartreuse, and I started becoming known as the Chartreuse guy, you know, because I always drank it. And I got a tattoo. My first New Orleans tattoo was the Chartreuse symbol.
The symbol. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, people are like, "Why'd you get that?" I'm like, "Well, I love Chartreuse, and I wanted my first New Orleans tattoo to be something that I would remember for New Orleans." And in New Orleans, that was what I was drinking every day. It's what I was using in my drinks. It was what I was teaching people about, telling people about. So
Yeah.
it was important that that was my first New Orleans tattoo. So
Okay. That's awesome. How did you get in touch with the people from Chartreuse? Did they just happen to walk into the bar and
it actually
serve them drink, or
it happened the old-fashioned way.
Okay.
So we have a distributor in most of our states in the U.S.
right?
Called Southern Glazers, and one of their reps knew me pretty well, and she actually shot me a text. Was like, "Hey, Chartreuse is looking for someone part-time to help out New Orleans for a few months. Your name came up every single time. You know, they would love to talk to you."
Okay.
So I just kind of interviewed,
Okay.
and then they came into town for a master class, and I was able to meet them all, and you know, it was kind of like the job wasn't mine yet, but they all were like, "Oh yeah, this is our guy."
Okay.
Like, it just kind of like just happened.
Yeah.
You know, and next thing I know, they made me an offer, and I just kind of started talking about Chartreuse every day.
Okay.
But back then, you know, we weren't selling Chartreuse like we are today.
Yeah.
You know, my job even then was education, but also to try and get placements.
Yeah.
You know, I was going in the bars trying to get people to buy yellow Chartreuse. 6 years later, I can't stop from people buying all this yellow Chartreuse. I can't find it anywhere.
Yeah.
People are like, "Can you get me some?" I'm like, "I can't."
I can't.
But it's amazing because I was trying to get placements 6 years ago, you know? And so I go around, I try and get some placements. I teach a class or two every now and then. Very easy part-time brand work. And my current boss and current mentor, Tim, reached out to me and said, "We think you should join us full-time. Like, we really like the work you do." And, you know, we talked about the job for months. You know, what would it be? What would it, like? It was they were kind of creating it for me, but also just trying to find the right fit for them, what they needed.
Yeah.
So there was even points in time where they're like, "We're not sure if you're right for what we're thinking," and I appreciated the honesty.
Yeah.
And eventually, it all came together, and they said, "Nope, this is what we want. You're perfect." And they moved me out to Houston, and I started my full-time role with them.
Yeah. I think that's when I first met you. Was
when we first met,
Yeah,
yeah.
right there, Mongoose Cobra.
Mongoose versus Cobra,
Cobra,
yeah,
for sure.
Feels like a lifetime ago.
Jeez. So, what were kind of some of the growing pains that you had moving from? First question, was there growing pains moving into a more full-time brand role versus bartending?
Yes, I mean there's growing pains throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
The biggest thing people don't understand is that it is a hard job. Everybody's like, "Oh, your job must be so easy and so fun," and I'm like, "You don't know."
Yeah.
But the hardest thing, transitional wise, is essentially you have to learn to be a normal person. You have to work in the day.
Yeah.
And I worked at bars that I would be getting done at 2, 3, 4 in the morning and sleeping till 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Now I had to be up in my chair at 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning and typing on my computer and, learning how to sit at a desk and then creating my own schedule.
Yeah.
I was just so happy being a bartender. You have 4 walls, you walk in, you're there for 12 hours, you know what you're doing, you go home.
Yeah.
Now it's like there's just chaos everywhere. I have a whole city instead of just 4 walls. So you got to figure out your schedule, where you're going to be, when you got to be there. You got to do it around other people, which is frustrating. I can't be like, Patrick, I'm free at 2 o'clock. I'm going to come. You're like, no, I'm not there.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, great. So
Yeah.
it is. It's a lot. And my metaphor for it is always like when you're in a bar, when you work at a bar, you bartend, you have 4 walls, you're in a box.
Yeah.
And there's little like ping pong balls all going everywhere. And your job is to catch them all. In a bar, it's 12 hours of catching all the balls, whether it's making drinks, throwing customers out, whatever. But then you switch to the brand side and there's 100 boxes and each have about 3 balls in them. And you got to get all of them fixed by Friday.
Yeah.
So it's a much different, like similar, passionate, professional career, but also it is definitely tough.
And do you have specifically KPIs, and for those of you who don't know, key performance indicators that you have to hit for your role?
Yeah, any brand ambassador will have these. It's essentially a way they measure how you do your job and how well you do your job. So I'm not going to get too much into mine, but I'll say essentially like I have to have 10 to 12 classes a year. 1 a month essentially. Or 8 events, or these are hypothetical numbers, but they say, okay, Matt, our budget fits 8 events this year, so you have to throw 8 events. And I always want to do more. I don't think it's enough. My boss would disagree. He's like, you always shoot for the moon. But I like doing these things, so I always want to do more. But realistically, it's time consuming. It takes a lot of energy as well. So. We always we have a little round table at the start of the year and we say like, what's doable? What is everybody comfortable with? We're good like that. I know a lot of other companies, the bosses will just say, these are your goals. These are your KPIs. But we have a good structure where we're able to discuss it a little bit first.
For sure. And when you were in a part-time role, was it still kind of the same kind of structure?
No.
Or full-time is when you have more specific target goals.
The part-time role was a little bit more shoot from the hip, casual. Like, Matt, whenever you have time, just go and try and do something. There was no rhyme or reason. It was, we had a call once a week, checking in, and I would let them know what I did. And that was it. Easy peasy. There was no bonuses. There was no incentives. They just gave me a small salary per month, and I was just to go buy people drinks, set up a couple of classes, and that's it. But then full time, you go, okay, like I got to do this every day now. And I'm salary employee, so like there is no clocking out when you want. You work all the time, and with starting off as the central ambassador, I had to manage Texas, Louisiana, Chicago, Denver, and I didn't even know how to manage one city, let alone 4 states. So it takes a lot of time to just, bring it in and like take a deep breath and say, okay, let me go down the checklist, one at a time. So
for sure. Have you see with your role progression, you've seen a lot of travel. What is your average percentage of being at home versus traveling throughout the year?
Mine's been a little different just because situational needs. In theory, we like to say, I believe 80-20 for our ambassadors, 80% in your market, 20% on the road. I've probably done a little bit more than that this year. But it's important that I do it. We have some great cities like Houston that I no longer live in, but that still needs, love, still needs to be represented well. We have to make sure the product is getting out there, and we have to make sure the bartenders know we still love them. So, leaving Houston, going to Chicago, as hard as it was, I knew I was going to be back a lot.
Yeah.
So, I traveled a lot between the two this year, and, we always have meetings in New York at our head office. And then we have these little events like Tales of the Cocktail. And so there's always a reason to travel.
Yeah. But it hasn't, you've kind of found that balance now.
Sure.
Been in this role for a while. Sure. We all say yes and no.
Absolutely. Travel is so much fun. And when you get to see your friends in cities that you really love and appreciate, it's always worth it. And it's great. And there's so many great bars out there. And, I was in Denver recently, and I just forgot how many great spots there are in Denver. And it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And Houston, I come back and I see all my old places, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I could just wake up and have lunch here tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like it never left.
Yeah.
But the hard thing about traveling is you get older, you get tired, you have to get 8 hours of sleep, and everybody wants you to go around to all these bars, but then at the end of the day, you have to be like, okay, I have to go to bed. I have to get sleep. I have to take care of myself.
Yep.
I have to go on a walk in the morning, exercise, So you have to time manage when you start traveling.
Yeah.
Because it is exhausting, but if you do it right, it's still fun.
Yeah. Time management is definitely important. Even bartending, like nowadays, is like a lot of us don't take care of ourselves. And that's something like we talked about in the last episode is how do you take care of yourself behind the bar? Like we work all the time. We don't drink enough water. Sometimes we forget to eat. Sometimes it's so busy we don't realize we eat until 3 or 4 in the morning.
And then what you eat, you know.
So.
Yeah, I mean, look, time management is something I wish I could tell you I mastered, but I did find that routines, it's hard to get into it, but someone told me the 21-day rule, which it takes 21 days to mentally, change something in your mind. So I started focusing on like proper routine, having a healthy breakfast at X o'clock, going on my walk at X o'clock, walking the dog, whatever. Just getting into that good routine. So my day is scheduled out every day at noon is usually when I take my lunch break. Yeah. And then I get into, work around the city. Okay. So I'll work from 8 a.m. till about noon. I have about 45 minutes to an hour to, get my bag packed, eat something real quick, sit down, have a moment. Yeah. Then I hop in the car, go around, start seeing all my accounts. Yeah. And then I usually try to say, okay, it's a 7 o'clock cutoff time. Like I got to be home, make dinner, so I know it's harder with bartenders, because you're just stuck somewhere sometimes. And I will say like meal prepping is huge. It's you can bring your meal to work. You don't have to eat the fries and the crackers. And, but time management and life management is becoming more and more important.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about family earlier. So I'm curious if you have any fun bartending family stories from your group that you're willing to talk about.
Family stories?
Yes.
Like
your bar family.
My bar family.
Your bar fam.
Quite a few, but I don't want to embarrass anybody.
I got you.
And I don't want to talk about too much about the things we've done.
But yes, I think we all have those stories where we're.
I will say the holiday parties. I won't get into any specific one, but I love the holiday parties because you never know who breaks out of their shell. Yeah. We had a guy who was kind of quiet and kind of nerdy, and I always loved him, and I got along with him. But everybody's like, "What's his deal?" And then one day we go to a karaoke bar for a holiday party, and he climbs up on the bar and he starts singing Ace of Spades. We're just like, yes, this kid's awesome, So I love the holiday parties with the bar family because it shakes everybody loose. You can decompress and have a good time. Because one thing we forget is when you're in a bar family, people have lives outside of that, and you get to know some people while you get to know others more. Yeah, and people misunderstand that. They go, oh well. This person's my friend, but this person isn't because they never want to grab a beer with me after work. Yeah. They just have another life. Yeah. So when you have that moment to actually get to know somebody a little bit more intimately. That I always loved my holiday party with the bar fam.
Yeah. Holiday parties are always fun. Like going back to introverted people, some people, especially in this industry, it's a very extroverted industry, but I think a lot of people forget that there's introverts in here.
Yeah,
But there's
very much
introverted,
so.
extrovert people that will surprise you sometimes.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a quiet, shy kid. People had no idea when I was bartending. They were like, "Oh, he's loud and crazy and obnoxious," but outside the bar, I was just calm, peaceful, quiet. You know, people are like, "You are very different." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." Well, they're like, "You haven't said one dirty joke yet." I'm like, "I normally don't, but when I'm behind the bar,
Yeah.
you know." So we have our bar personalities and we have our lives, and some people just have one, which is fine. But yeah, the people who are a little introverted, it just takes a little bit to help them step out of that shell in the bar world for sure.
Yeah, I was definitely started introverted too, and then starting the kitchen, then somehow decided I wanted to go front of house, and then it's kind of the
And that
story
makes
from there.
sense. You know, kitchen is I'm you know, it's amazing that so many chefs have big personalities because you would think they wouldn't, being you know stuck back there. And I have such respect for chefs. I mean, what they do is just it's hard. It's it's amazing. We forget how similar we are. We're just like, someone's getting mad at the chef, but then they're getting mad at us, and it's I wish that in my past restaurants, the chef to front of house was just a better team. You know, it always seems to be a big disconnect. It always seems to be a blame game. I do wish that I could see that grow more. Obviously, I don't work in restaurants anymore, but I do see like the better places, the Michelin star places. They're pretty well connected. They're doing it right. So I think there should be more education on how to work with your chefs and communicate with your chefs better.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think the industry itself is moving more towards that collaborative effort between front of house and back of house.
Good.
At least from what I've seen with the consultings we've done. But there are still some places like the chef, there's egos that are involved sometimes, and some
egos
people
in
are,
this industry.
sometimes it's very hard to get past that for certain people.
Yeah.
But I do agree that it's very important that chefs and the bar, or chefs in front of house, everybody should have constant communication.
Yeah. I think a lot about egos, both chef and bartender.
Yeah.
And, I discourage it, but also I get it. Like, we're passionate. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay to be passionate. I've met some bartenders who they thought they were God.
Yes.
They thought they were the alcohol God, and I was put off by it, but I'm like, hey, like they get shit done. Their customers love them. Their drinks are great. Yeah. I got nothing to say. I've met people who think high of themselves that aren't doing great work. Yeah. Or show up late to their jobs or, whatever. So if you're doing it right, you can have an ego. It's fine. I don't mind it at all, with a bartender especially. So
it's good to have ego, and it's also good to be confident.
Yes.
I guess there's a difference, right?
Yeah. One of my old bosses taught me there's a difference between confidence and cockiness. Yeah. And it's hard to tell until you know. So I've always tried to be a confident bartender and never a cocky bartender. But who knows? I might have made some mistakes along the way.
Yeah. We all start somewhere. I think I was a bit cocky when I first started too. And then as it progressed, I'm kind of like...
I also think it's how I was raised.
Okay.
So...
I got you.
But yeah, I mean, I've worked with some good people, like my old manager at the Bombay Club, who actually taught me how to be better communication with the guests that were Southern. Because I had this thick Northern accent at the time, and I was like, "Hey, yous guys, what's going on?" And he's like, "Hey, why don't you try saying like this when people come in? Like, you telling me I don't talk no good?" He's like, but no, his name was Chris, great guy. But he actually was like, just think of it as like how you should greet somebody, like, And I was like, "Oh yeah, this is a fine dining establishment. It is a nice place." And then I was just like, "Why don't I treat every bar like it's a nice fine dining establishment?" And I definitely learned a little bit manners and how to talk to the guests a little bit better through that. So
that's awesome.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, for being here today.
Thank you, Patrick.
Awesome. If you want to give everybody a call out real quick to your IG, if you want them to follow you.
Yeah,
if you have any questions.
Matt MATT_LoFink LOFINK. Give me a follow if you want to ask any Chartreuse related questions or any questions about myself or Patrick. I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, awesome. Thank you for being here. Again, thank you all for watching the podcast today. Again, we'll see you next time.
Cheers.